Hello everybody, and welcome to the presentation of our paper, which contributes an overview of publications on group navigation in multi-user virtual reality. The ability of getting from one location to another is one of the most fundamental requirements for interaction in VR, and prior research has proposed a large variety of different techniques to do so. However, up to this point, most of these developments were optimized for single-user systems. Our work in this paper aims to extend previous developments and taxonomies by studying navigation processes that involve multiple users. So let's assume that this group here is done discussing the house, and they would like to move on to a different object to discuss about it. So how can they get there together as a group? The most common solution to do so is to allow each user to navigate individually, and just ask everybody to get there on their own. However, this approach has certainly some coordination overhead, which is especially problematic when one user knows more about the environment than the others and just has to constantly tell everybody where to go. So, as a promising alternative, group navigation techniques move all group members together using a vehicle or platform metaphor, while only one navigator has the responsible job of operating this vehicle. In prior work, we applied a psychological model for group work to the classification of group navigation techniques in VR. And our framework states that implementations of group navigation techniques need to provide support for users to form navigational groups, to distribute navigational responsibilities, to perform the actual task of navigating together, and eventually to split up again. And while we provide an in-depth overview of approaches for all phases in the paper, I will spend the rest of my talk today to present some selected examples for performing techniques, as they are at the core of this whole process. So to classify these techniques, we categorize them by the type of multi-user virtual reality system for which they were presented. In particular, we use the number of distributed workspaces and the number of physically co-located users within each of these spaces for classification. So let's start with purely co-located collaboration, where we have just one shared physical workspace for all users. So in this example, we have 6 tracked users in front of a multi-user projection system, which enables each of them to perceive a prospectively correct view onto the virtual environment. And to navigate together, we can think of this workspace as a virtual vehicle that can be steered by this guy here to move the whole group forward, as you can see here. And actually, the very same idea of navigating together can be applied to co-located users with head-mounted displays as well, such that navigation inputs by one user will just take the other user along. And since users of head-mounted displays cannot directly see each other in the real world, this has the additional benefit that the virtual avatars are always in sync with the real-world positions of the users. However, navigating this vehicle here by steering is often avoided in head-mounted displays to prevent simulator sickness. So how could teleportation-based travel work for these two users here? Let's see. We have the navigator here in blue, the passenger in red, and this is the corresponding view of the passenger. And if the navigator here now just uses a standard technique for short-distance teleportation and takes the passenger along, which would look like this, then it's very hard to estimate before the jump where the passenger will end up exactly, as the target ray here only conveys information about the navigator's target, but not the passenger's one. So in earlier work, we therefore established the notion of comprehensible group navigation techniques, which should foster the awareness of ongoing navigation activities and facilitate the predictability of their consequences for all users. To improve comprehensibility in this scenario here, a very simple yet effective approach is to add a secondary target ray for the passenger, a technique that we called multi-ray jumping. And while joint travel with multi-ray jumping works well, it leads to strange situations at corners, where the combination of physical rotations and virtual translations can change the spatial formation of the diet. So before, it was a side-by-side formation, which now turned into a queue formation that has to be corrected by physical walking before going on. And while we can't do much about this in co-located setups, because just the tracked real-world space tells us how users are arranged, user formations in distributed setups are more flexible, as they do not share the same physical workspace anymore. As a result, an extension of multi-ray jumping allows the navigator to incorporate virtual formation adjustments, where they can decide where the passenger should end up relative to them after the jump by swiping on the touchpad of the controller. And this approach showed promising results for the joint navigation of distributed dyads, but of course, the obvious question here is if this approach is also scalable for larger groups in distributed virtual reality. And well, the obvious answer is not at all, because Navigator would not be able to position each user individually, and seeing all these target rays might just be a bit too much. So in this year's journal track of the conference, we therefore present a new group navigation technique for larger groups of distributed users and evaluate it in the context of guided museum tours. Our technique builds upon the use of preview avatars for comprehensible group navigation, while offering virtual formation adjustments to avoid user collisions with the environment and optimize their views onto a common exhibit. So in summary, the presented techniques today were just a selection from what we discuss in the paper. But nevertheless, our overall conclusion is that research on group navigation is still at the beginning. In the paper, we categorize relevant aspects for future work into 4 topic areas, highlighting the need to study alternative implementations of group navigation techniques, large group compositions like entire crowds or even audiences, social factors during joint navigation, like social presence and the overall sense of togetherness. And finally, combinations of collocated and distributed groups like here, where we have 2 distributed teams with 2 collocated users each, which presents us with various novel challenges for realizing group navigation. So, as you can see, there's still a lot to do, but for today, I would like to conclude my talk and thank you very much for your attention.